It's the time of year temperatures start hitting the 90s pretty much every day, and Haley's with us to talk about how to stay healthy in the heat, because we kind of forget, we get so used to it down here, how dangerous it can be.
Yeah, it's slowly creeping up. We're kind of underestimating a little bit. So we haven't quite hit Memorial Day, as we just mentioned, and we're talking about that heat and humidity because heat safety this morning is Chief Medical Officer Dr. David Persse with the City of Houston. Hey, good morning, Dr. Persse.
And you know, your comment just a moment ago about it being so humid. So there are a couple of, so first of all, think about heat illnesses on a spectrum, and you can progress. They're working hard, perhaps they're jogging and it's a hot part of the day, but they're sweating profusely. Now, we live in a very humid environment, and so the way sweating cools your body is that when your sweat evaporates, that takes heat with it and cools off. But if it's really humid, that sweat is not going to evaporate. So it becomes a little bit less functional here than it would in a dry climate. So the thing that people need to watch out for is when they start feeling completely overwhelmed, or they may get dizzy, or they may get nauseated, or they may have a headache. That is your body telling you you're getting into trouble and you need to get into air conditioning. And if you don't, you will likely move on to the next heat illness, which is heat stroke. And this is when your body's ability to cool itself, generally again through perspiration, fails. It fails either because you've lost already so much fluid, there's none left to give really, or because you've just gotten so hot that it actually shuts down. And this is when your body's core temperature will shoot up, and that includes the temperature of your brain. And so unfortunately, one of the very first symptoms of heat stroke is confusion. And so at that point, that person is really no longer able to save themselves because they're confused, and it can happen very quickly in as little as just a few minutes. And so one other thing I want your viewers to understand is that some years we see this sort of double hump. And in the beginning of the summer, we see people who are outside. These are young, healthy, vibrant people who are outside working or exercising. And those are the ones that get into heat stroke in the early part of the year because they don't think about these things. And so, you know, it can be very, very dangerous. And heat stroke, your brain is actually being damaged, and you can absolutely die from heat stroke.
Yeah, and you're reiterating what we were saying, that, you know, it's the beginning part of the summer. People might be underestimating it because we typically talk about this in July and in August. And you're reminding me that in those hotter parts of the summer, we also remind people that your body, the heat index is what your body thinks it is. So even though the temperature is 90 but feels like 95, your body thinks it's that 95 degrees. Why are we just mentioned younger people getting themselves in trouble at the early part of the summer, but why are older people particularly vulnerable when we're talking about being out in the heat?
Older people tend to not be outside working hard like we just talked about with the younger folks. In older folks, it's a different situation. First of all, their bodies don't respond to the heat as well. And secondarily, they don't sweat as much or as effectively as a younger person is. And so they will very often, get heat stroke. And what we see is in the beginning of the summer, we often see the young folks that we just talked about. In the end of the summer is when we see this cumulative effect of the elder folks, their bodies that get hot during the day and then they cool off a little bit at night, and it's a cumulative type of thing. And of course, they've got a lot of chronic illnesses that make it more difficult for their body. And one thing to keep in mind is that elder people, it takes about twice as long for their bodies to cool down as it does for a younger person. Again, because their bodies are not as functional and as effective at managing the heat. So, we in the early summer, when we see the young folks, this is where, you need to pay attention to what your body's telling you. And if you're outside working with a bunch of folks and somebody says, man, I feel lousy, I'm gonna go get some air conditioning, you need to make sure they get into that air conditioning. I can tell you tragic stories of folks who said that. They said, I feel lousy, I'm gonna go get in the truck and turn on the air conditioning, and their buddies continued working. And then 20 minutes later, they say, so, what happened to our friend? And then they go find him. He never made it to the truck. They find him passed out in the parking lot, or they find him, he's wandered off someplace. With elder folks, it's really where neighbors need to check on neighbors, kids need to check on their parents, because it's a cumulative thing, and this is very commonly in elder folks who live in homes that are not air conditioned. So things that you can do is you can take them to the mall, you can take them to a movie, you can do things that get them into air conditioning, hopefully, during the hottest part of the day, give their bodies a chance to catch up and to cool down. Because otherwise, this day after day, this getting super hot and then not cooling off completely, and then getting hotter the next day and not cooling off completely, it adds up. And we see these tragic situations with older folks at the end of the summer, completely preventable if somebody's looking out for them.
So again, if they're feeling any kind of confusion, get inside, get to the shade. The shade can be 20 degrees cooler than being out in the sun. So great safety tips from you there, Dr. Persse. I appreciate it. Anything to say before we let you go?
No, I think that, people need, we could talk about a rule of L. So if you're going to be outside, wear lightweight, loose fitting, lightly colored clothes, drink plenty of liquids, but avoid caffeine and alcohol, because those will both stimulate your kidneys to make urine and dehydration more, and also the sugary soft drinks, because your body tries to get rid of all that extra sugar, that will also dehydrate. So when we talk about liquids, we're really talking about water, or maybe even watered down sports drinks, but no caffeine, no alcohol, and no heavily sugared drinks.
Water, water, water. Excellent tips right up on the screen right next to you, Dr. Persse. Thank you for joining us for this live interview this morning.